Good day to everyone. I am Kevin Lampe of Kurth Lampe Worldwide, and welcome to our webinar. We have 37 people who joined us as attendees, and our panelists are ready. If you would like to ask a question during the course of the webinar, please, you can go to the Q&A function in your screen and type in your question there. There we'll be able to see it, and we'll be able to ask the panelists of that question. And I now turn this over to the Coalition for Dialogue and Negotiation. Judith, please, we are ready to begin for you.
Okay. Thanks, Kevin, for always being there for us, and Happy New Year to everybody. Welcome to all of you for joining us across the world for this, our webinar session. We are looking forward to a very good discussion here. This webinar hosted by the Coalition for Dialogue and Negotiations. It's titled The United Nations Security Council, Peace in Cameroon, the Role of the United Kingdom's Presidency and Irish Membership. So before we start, I would like to say congratulations to Ireland for joining the Security Council this year. We are looking for big things to come out from your membership at the Security Council. We also are looking forward to UK's presidency next month. So as UK takes over the presidency of the Security Council in February, it is necessary, the coalition thinks, to examine how the UK government will lead in addressing the current conflict in Cameroon. It is also important for us to see how Ireland's membership will shape its reaction to the challenging moments we are facing in Cameroon. We continue to congratulate Ireland, whom since 1962 has demonstrated a relentless commitment to the protection of people's rights and the promotion of preventive diplomacy in averting the escalation of armed conflicts. We believe that a multilateral approach to preventing armed conflicts or the de-escalation of conflicts through preventive diplomacy, mediation, and negotiations should be universally encouraged as an effective and sustained mechanism to addressing the root causes of armed conflicts across the globe. As you all know, an armed conflict erupted in Cameroon in 2017 between the government of Cameroon security forces and armed separatist fighters in former British Southern Cameroons, today termed Anglophone Cameroons, which are currently the Northwest and Southwest regions. And the British Southern Cameroons are seeking to restore what used to be called British Southern Cameroons before joining the Republic of Cameroon. So far, we've had over 10,000 deaths. This is an underreported number. Over 10,000 deaths, imprisonment, incarceration, and various human rights abuses in Cameroon. We've had over 400 villages burned down, over 900,000 internally displaced, over 70,000 refugees in Nigeria, and over 1 million children who haven't been to school for more than 3 years now. In 2020, the UK provided a sum total of $20 million in humanitarian assistance, 6 million in September alone. In December this year, during the Security Council meeting, Ambassador Barbara Woodward, during the UNOCA presentation, please can you mute? Can we mute everybody? During the UNOCA presentation in the Security Council last December, Ambassador Barbara stressed the need for an inclusive dialogue to meet the demands of the Southern Cameroonians. And amidst the numerous violations of international human rights against civilians and unhindered access to humanitarian assistance, she also joined other countries while echoing the interest of the UK government to peace in these two regions, she also joined other countries to state their unequivocal support in seeking negotiations through mediation to address the root causes as the only durable mechanism to restore peace. So why did we call this webinar? As a prelude to this webinar, the coalition hosted a 3-day international conference in November last year, bringing together over 1,000 Southern Cameroonian professionals across the globe, more than 200 diplomats, members of parliament, peace, mediation, and conflict resolution experts from around the world. The overwhelming majority of participants agreed to the following. International human rights violations have been committed by both parties, and the government of Cameroon has not demonstrated transparency and accountability in investigating and holding to account all the perpetrators. This needs to be done. There needs to be access to humanitarian assistance and security of aid workers assured. Over 10 million Anglophone Cameroonians will be in need of humanitarian assistance this year. This number is expected to increase as the armed conflict continues. There was universal agreement that diplomats, MPs, experts acknowledge there will be no military solution to the conflict, calling the international community to force parties to negotiate and provide mediation for such negotiations to occur. Participants believe the United Nations Security Council, and particularly the United Kingdom and now Ireland, based on colonial and historical ties with the affected area, must play an active role in pushing for mediation, for mediated negotiations and pressuring the Cameroon government to engage in negotiations with the armed separatists for durable peace. So what do we hope to get out of this webinar? To examine the UK's commitment to protection of human rights and global peace, its role in the decolonization of former British Southern Cameroons, and how this can inform UK's engagement to durable peace in Cameroon. Analyze the potential impact of an active UK engagement in a United Nations Security Council mediated and negotiated settlement of the conflict. Explore how the Irish government can promote and play an active role towards UN intervention to end the armed conflict, and explore how UK and Irish think tanks and peace organizations can contribute to shaping UK and Irish government's policy towards ending the armed conflict. So I'm going to introduce our moderator, but before I do that, I just want to give some context to our panelists, because we are sorry to announce that when we initially put this webinar out, it was supposed to be at 11 a.m. Eastern time, but due to an important diplomatic meeting which came our way unexpectedly, we had to move the meeting, the webinar 1 hour later to 12 noon. And for that reason, we lost Archbishop Jude Thaddeus Okolo, the Apostolic Nuncio of the Holy See to Ireland, and also Right Reverend Declan Lang, Bishop of Clifton. But they all send their regards, and they are going to be helping to see how they can join forces to bring peace to Cameroon. That being said, I will introduce our moderator for the day, Ms. Ifad Rahman, which I think a lot of you know her already from the conference. She's a special representative for the African Bar Association regarding the humanitarian crisis in English-speaking Cameroon. Prior to joining the African Bar Association, Ms. Rahman was a visiting professional at the International Criminal Court, a legal intern at the International Criminal Court Tribunals for Rwanda and for the former Yugoslavia, a civil party representative at the Khmer Rouge Tribunal, and an operational desk officer at UNHCR Malaysia. She holds a law degree from the City University of New York, a certificate of international law from Oxford University, and a bachelor's in international development studies from McGill University. Ifa, thanks once more again for accepting to moderate this panel, and I'll hand over to you.
Thank you so much for having me, and I apologize for the conflict earlier with my schedule. I had an important phone call to make, so my apologies to everybody. And I'm so honored to be moderating this panel because I have this special love for Ireland. And it's because I guess in terms of my upbringing in the United States, because there's so much Irish connection. Also, I went around at the UN telling, I don't want to say people, but telling diplomats, saying like, Ireland's going to get on the Security Council, Ireland's going to get on the Security Council. And when I met Irish diplomats, they're like, oh my God, you're thinking too far ahead. And I told them, no, I think you guys are going to get on. And it's because they ran an excellent campaign, and some of the things that are going to be very important for us for this panel. And it's also very interesting because Ireland competed against Canada, and I'm Canadian. So I told Irish diplomats that you guys are going to end up representing us. You know, you're going to end up being Canada's voice on the Security Council. And so it's very exciting for me to be a Canadian, to be moderating a panel of Irish. Yeah, and I do like, just on a personal level, I do love your mission, and they're great people, great diplomats, great diplomats, and I bug them so much. And I think at this point they know, but excellent group of people, and I love Ireland. So I think like if you just go on my Twitter page, I'm like Ireland. So also maybe to push against the UK, but that's just me being me. So I'm very honored that I am getting to moderate this panel. So without further delay, I would love to introduce Dr. Pat Haynes, who is the Political Dialogue Program Manager at the Glencree Center for Peace and Reconciliation in Ireland since 2015. Dr. Haynes has a wealth of experience from peace and political arena. Throughout the 1990s, Dr. Haynes worked with various Irish government ministers in the early years of peace process, later participating in Glencree's political dialogue workshops leading up to the Good Friday Belfast Agreement. His international work spans from 15 years of including participation in Glencree's Middle East program working on conflicts. More recently, Dr. Haynes acted as a special advisor to former, forgive me for mispronouncing, former Taifskas Bertie Ahern in his role as chairman of the Bougainville Referendum Commission. This role involved working with the UN as the sought to bring to a reconciliation of New Papua Guinea Bougainville peace process. Pat is, forgive me, Dr. Haynes is part of the adjunct faculty at Maynooth University, where he lectures and works with the Edward M. Kennedy Institute for Conflict Resolution. Next, I'm also going to introduce Reverend Com Lennon.
Not a reverend. I'm not a reverend.
Oh, I'm sorry. He's the chair of.
By no means. My 3 children would testify to that.
I hope I'm pronouncing Com Lennon. Lennon is the chair for Portsmouth. Is it Danskin, Portsmouth, and Bambanda committee appointed by Right Reverend Philip Egan, Bishop of Portsmouth and member of Catholic Bishops' Conference for England and Wales. Com is the bishop's focal point on Cameroon and has attributed in strengthening relations between Bambada Archdiocese and the Diocese of Portsmouth. His perspective here is vital to inform the UK diplomatic, political, and religious community. And then I'm going to open up the floor to the panelists in order for you to do a 5-minute introduction, also what you have to say. Then we're going to jump into the discussion. Was that all right with you, gentlemen? Dr. Haynes, since I've introduced you first, I would love for you to go first, and then Com can come in second. Is that okay?
Okay. And just like you've elevated Colin there now to a reverend, I'm not a doctor. I'm just regular. Oh. I'm just a regular. That's okay.
Okay, we could have just pretended like you.
So let me begin by thanking Judith and Henry and yourself and to all the team for giving me this opportunity to come and participate in this. It was a bit of a learning experience when I spoke to Judith and Henry to learn of the developing situation in Cameroon. And what I kind of said to them was, look, I'd participate in this and give a little sense of some of the work that we'd undertaken in Ireland that might prove of interest and be useful in terms of particularly the need to address all of these issues using, as we did, mediated and negotiated dialogue structures. I should begin by saying that, look, we had a conflict on this island, but no two conflicts are the same. We don't have the answers to anybody's conflict. We don't have a rule book. We have a set of experiences that we went through in order to resolve our conflict. And maybe just to say a little bit about that, our conflict raged in the modern sense for about 25 or 30 years. Again, 3.5, almost 4,000 people lost their lives, 50,000 casualties over that period. And many, many more to this very day suffer from the trauma of that violence over 30 years. So my role in Glencree and my role in the past has been to get into long and sustained negotiations, discussions, dialogues around various aspects of the peace process. And the things we learned as we resolved our process was that a process needs to be comprehensive. It needs to be as inclusive as it possibly can. And as you began, or I think it was Judith began, there's no security solution to what is essentially a political problem. We had a political dispute in Ireland between identities, national identities, religious identities, and issues around geography and land. But essentially, it was about creating a shared home place, a space where people could exist and, in a sense, be respected and respectful of each other's differences. Conflict the world over is, in many ways, about one thing. It's about difference and the inability of communities and so on to come to terms with that. In our conflict, we did descend into, as I've said earlier, a long period of sustained violence. The great John Hume and Seamus Mallon, but particularly the efforts of John Hume, the Nobel laureate, I think he made a unique and important contribution to understand how you get a once violent organization to come to terms with either those who opposed him or governments or whatever. And his belief was that if you could get to the very sources of conflict, get deep into the issues, then you had a chance of getting them to stop, because of course in many cases these organizations believe in what they're doing and believe it's right. So what you've got to try and do is to create a space, in many cases privately, where you can get agreement with these groups to, as it were, agree some bottom lines among themselves, so that when the violence ceases and the negotiations start, there's a relatively clear understanding among groups who are engaged in violence around what the compromises might be going into any negotiations or dialogue. This is where the dialogue, the private teasing out, is so vitally important. And I would encourage, and I said to Judith and Henry in our previous conversations, an awful lot of work needs to begin now with those groups who are engaged in the kind of armed conflict to work out some set of agreed bottom lines or principles around what it is they will accept. For the part of the government, it does need a lot of visionary leadership on the part of governments. It's very difficult for sovereign governments to agree or meet with those who are engaged in violence. It can be very difficult. I think what we learned in our conflict, and if you examine the role of the British in our particular conflict, there were many courageous leaders within the British system, most notably among them obviously John Major and others, who did take political risks in engaging with those who were, as we might say, engaged in violence on the other side against the UK. Those efforts, those very confidential and secret efforts of sending signals and indicating a willingness to open up a process, created the space for what ultimately became the Downing Street Declaration of Principles, and then ultimately the Good Friday Agreement. The Good Friday Agreement essentially created structures that would go to the very heart of the conflict in Ireland, the broken relationships between the two communities in Northern Ireland, the broken relationships between North and South, and the very difficult and historical relationship between Britain and Ireland. And what we managed to do in Good Friday was to reframe those sets of relationships and work actively to improve them and to get closer together in our effort to sustain the peace and deepen a sense of reconciliation. It was very slow. There was a huge amount of mistrust involving weapons, involving prisoners, involving the legacy of the past, which still is being dealt with to this day. But the hope in it all is that the violence actually stopped. The Good Friday Agreement gave us the space and the peace to look at each other afresh in human terms and to work actively at deepening the reconciliation, which had never really occurred in the past. We still have problems, we still have difficulties, we still have a lot of challenges in front of us, because as I've said earlier, there's an awful lot of damage in terms of trauma and difficulty for those who lost loved ones during the conflict. And it has been our efforts in recent years focused on trying as best we can to construct and arrange structures to deal with all of this trauma that has been left. In conclusion, as I say, it's not that we in Ireland have a textbook or a manual. We do have a set of experiences, and I think lessons that we have drawn and learned from this conflict. And as I've said, it fundamentally is about repairing broken relationships and creating structures, whether that is in the European context, where, as John Hume often said, he stood on that bridge in Kiel between Germany and France, between two countries that had slaughtered each other for 150 years. And yet he was standing at the center of institutions in Europe, where the French were still French and the Germans were still German, but they had pooled their sovereignty and their efforts and their energy and their trust in each other to create something bigger than themselves and better. And fundamentally, that came down to a mix of human relationships, courage, persistence, and structures that recognized and protected the differing identities on the continent. And he imported much of that thinking into the architecture and structure of the Good Friday Agreement. We've been fortunate in the last number of years that we haven't seen any significant, in fact, any violence to speak of since the signing of the agreement. We still work through the trauma. We still work at deepening the reconciliation and the relationships between ourselves, the United Kingdom, and those within Northern Ireland. And the agreement gives us the basis and the structure to do that. So thank you very much.
Colm, I would love for you to now jump in. I would love for you to jump in and also give us your point of view on this conflict. Kevin, can you unmute Colm? We can't hear him.
Colm, if you could unmute yourself, please. There you go. Very good. Okay. You are set.
Okay, well, I'll start again then. Many thanks to the Coalition for the invitation to attend this panel meeting. I'm afraid I feel I shouldn't really be here because I'm no expert on conflict. All I can do is tell you about the relationship we have with Bamenda, which is in the heart of the Anglophone area in Cameroon, the work we do and what we've tried to achieve and what we have suffered as a result of the ongoing conflict. And I hope that just simply helps to give a little bit of background to what the situation is like and the problems that we're all facing in trying to resolve this conflict. I'll start by saying I'm here to represent the Diocese of Portsmouth and its charity arm, which is the charity arm of the diocese itself. I've chaired this Bamenda committee for some 10 years. We're a small committee and all of us are unpaid volunteers. None of us are professionals. The relationship with the Diocese of Portsmouth and Bamenda goes back some 47 years. So we do know a little bit about the situation out there. And in following Vatican II, it was agreed the two dioceses should be twinned. In the early days, interestingly enough, we had missionaries going out to Bamenda. Well, the flow of vocations has not been very fast in this country. And we now have a reverse situation whereby we have some 6 priests from Bamenda to Cameroon now ministering in Portsmouth Diocese. As a small charity, we are largely dependent for funding on an annual collection in all our churches throughout the diocese. With these funds and through a process of cooperation with Bamenda, we work with local communities in the areas of faith, education, health, and social welfare. Over the years, we have assisted in the building and renovation of schools, health centres, and clinics. On the education front, which is something I'm very passionate about, we had in 2017, some 12 primary and secondary schools, twinned with more in the pipeline. And I must say, I find it somewhat ironic where here in the UK and Ireland, we are understandably and correctly concerned about our children losing weeks from schools, when in Bamenda, many of the children have missed education for 4 years. And even where those have been to school, it's been very patchy. We have also been involved in work with justice and peace programs, water supply, and many others. More recently, we have been supporting the ad hoc commission, which was set up by the Portsmouth Diocese in helping to support some of the thousands of internally displaced people who have flooded into Bamenda. Up to 2017, I, along with fellow members, would visit Bamenda once or even twice a year to see work on the various projects we've been supporting and to explore ways in which we could strengthen our relationship. Sadly, since the escalation of the violence, we have been unable to visit in the light of government advice, which says Bamenda and most of the Anglophone area is a no-go area. During this time, however, we have witnessed through social media and communication with many friends the escalation of the violence, the destruction of schools, hospitals, and health centres, some of which we actually helped to provide. Maybe because of my long years, unfortunately, this is not the first time I have been a witness to this sort of tragedy. As a young man, I spent 3 years as a teacher in Pujahan, a small town in Sierra Leone, which was a very formative period in my life. Some 20 years later, as a member of Concern Universal Charity, I witnessed at first hand the devastation of Sierra Leone during its civil war, the deaths of old friends, the use of boy soldiers, and of course, the destruction of the school that we had built. As a small charity, any influences we can bring to bear on the British and Irish government is limited. In this respect, some efforts have been made, and our Bishop Philip has written to all MPs representing the diocese, seeking their support. As a committee, we have also, through our website and through speaking to various groups, encouraged people to write as well to put pressure on our MPs. We believe this has had some impact and led to the British government providing some further aid more recently for the internally displaced peoples in Bamenda. No doubt, in the coming year, we will continue to pursue ways of pressuring the UK government in its role as President of the UN to bring the warring parties to the table. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You gentlemen bring wealth of experience and knowledge regarding the Anglophone region and your own experience in terms of Ireland. Pat, let me start with you. What you said regarding, Ireland. There's no book for how to solve a crisis on, what you've learned in Ireland. I don't know how you can, in terms of like, you can, there's no book, right? There's not a scripture that you can go and say, okay, we're going to use this to solve another conflict. But Pat, I want to go back on this, and I want to push back a bit, and I would love for you to come in, and Colm also. I would love for you to also jump in from your personal experience in terms of being also Irish. And I am convinced that the folks from the Anglophone regions or Southern Cameroons can have some experience in this, and we see the word colonization over and over and over with these regions. I was wondering if you can actually speak on that issue, because this issue is, I feel like, hits the heart of Ireland in terms of colonization, and the experiences that you've learned and what you can share with the Anglophone Cameroonian, Southern Cameroonians, and what they can take away from it. And I say this, and I want to start off from a domestic perspective, but it matters on an international side, because this is something that the Irish government has promoted over and over when they were running for a seat on the Security Council. They themselves have been colonized, so they themselves can identify with former colonies. So I would love for you to jump in and tell us from your personal experience and also, I guess, from on a domestic side of how Irish people can, in terms of connect with Southern Cameroonians.
When I say to you that we've no manual, it's extremely important that we don't assume that the process that we have constructed in the context of resolving our conflict will work everywhere else. We do have as I say, an experience which clearly molds us in particular ways and makes us, as it were, sensitive to the experiences of other people in similar circumstances around the world, like Cameroon. Despite the tragedy of Irish history and the difficulties we had throughout history with our neighbours and so on, what we were faced with in our generation, in the midst of appalling violence and daily killings, in the most awful circumstances, was the challenge of reaching conclusions more about the future than about the from us. We had to find a new dispensation, and we had to accept that while the legacy of history did, of course, include people who came from afar and settled in Ireland many centuries ago, they were now our neighbours. They were now the people that we had to share our streets and our shops and our places with. And we had to create the opportunities and the circumstances where an appropriate dialogue would be arrived at, where we would see those people as human beings alongside us, and that they were not to be, in a sense, treated differently, but rather a process that was going to be inclusive, recognizing the differences, acknowledging the differences, and yet creating the safety and security where they could be as they felt themselves within their community, the same as we wanted to do. we arrived at a principle called the parity of esteem between two communities. And a parity of esteem meant that we would acknowledge and protect the two traditions equally. Although we came from different perspectives, although we have different aspirations, we would put a parity of esteem on that allowed an equal expression of that, without one denigrating the other, without one trying to coerce the other in any particular direction. And what that meant was that we had a process, and we created a process that is almost to this day living in itself, where we have to get up each day and acknowledge that we have a community to live with who differ from us. We have been successful in that. It has taken a huge amount of work, and it has taken an enormous effort in terms of our relationship with the United Kingdom and so on. It was painstaking. I mean, if you trace back to the conflict as it was raging in the 1980s, there was a demand by Republicans, Brits out. Brits must go home. Well, where were they going to go? This was their home. This was where they lived. This is where they were born. So a process had to be constructed whereby we would reach conclusions about the right of those people and those communities to exist and to continue to prosper and flourish and develop relationships with us. These were very, very difficult concepts to advance in some communities. But at the end of the day, it wasn't about territory. The people in Ireland were divided in their minds. The land wasn't divided. The people were united, were divided. And the challenge for us was to unite people in common purpose about what the future could look like, not necessarily about the past. Unfortunately, in Ireland, we have a common history, but we don't have a common memory. The memories divide us. The history is the same, but the memories divide us. But what we had to do, and what we continue to do to this day, is to try and create and write new history. The Irish people, if you look back through our writings, our poetry, our songs, it's one of sadness, it's one of loss, it's one of difficulty. We're in many ways the first generation of Irish people that got to write new history post Good Friday Agreement. So we now write new history rather than seeing ourselves as the victims of history. And that is a consequence of that dialogue and going through those long years of discussions, reaching conclusions, difficult compromises, but nevertheless seeing those in our midst as our neighbours and clearly as fellow human beings that we had to live with. So when I say we don't have a book or a manual, I hope I'm giving you a sense of the journey, because peacemaking is a journey. We didn't front load the destination in the first few steps. We started the journey, we deepened the trust, and we let the destination take care of itself.
Colm, do you want to add anything to what Pat said?
I found what Pat said very, very interesting and ringing a lot of bells for me. But just going back to Cameroon, it's very interesting that Cameroon as an entity, which is relatively new, comes about from having two colonial masters. Well, even three altogether. The initial one was German, and it was only after the First World War that the British and the French agreed on a division of the areas that had been run by Germany. And following on from that tradition, with the French running one part and the British running another, you do get some different cultures emerging. And this is at the heart of the problem today, really, where for nearly 100 years or so, you were getting a tradition in Southern Cameroon, as you call it, of the British system, with British law being introduced, British education, the English language being the first language, and in the rest of the country, you had the French system, a centralized system, totally different. And the two ran together parallel. It was only when they were combined together into one country, reluctantly on the part of the Southern Cameroon, I won't go into the politics of it, that it was quite clear that the French area was the dominant one. And gradually over the years, the perspective in the English-speaking area was that the institutions that were important through the English system in terms of the law and education were systematically being taken away. And it was only when, back in 2017, that you had the legal profession and the teaching profession starting a legitimate and peaceful process, that the problem began to explode and has progressively got worse. And that's where we find ourselves today. Yes, there is a colonial tradition there, but it was that's something that other countries, Nigeria next door, has also been experiencing.
Thank you so much. Sorry, I'm hearing someone's mic is on, I think. Pat, I was wondering if you can speak about your experience in terms of Sierra Leone and what you think or the lessons we can apply, even in Bougainville, the new Papua Guinea, also to see if we can learn any lessons from there and apply it to the Cameroonian context, because I believe they've done a referendum for statehood. It has a very interesting history, and if you see any similarities between the conflict in Cameroon and the process of how they achieve the status they have in, or they managed to get recognition within the international community, and any lessons for us to take away from that process.
Again, just to be mindful that the process continues. The former Taoiseach, Bertie Ahern, was charged with responsibility to oversee that referendum. Last year, we completed that effort last year. There is now, of course, a series of outworkings that flow from that as to what the, and again, I come back to this word, it'll keep coming up. What's the nature of the relationship that now has to exist between Bougainville and Papua New Guinea, and how they are going to relate to each other? That is now ongoing. I mean, clearly there was a conflict, there was a peace process in Bougainville. To be fair to all of the participants, the Papua New Guinean government and the Bougainvillean authorities, they committed to that process, and one of the conditions was that within a 20-year time span of the agreement being signed, they would hold a referendum on what the people of Bougainville wanted to do. Last year, they voted in an independence referendum. So what I think will happen in the next steps in that case was that clearly the Bougainville authorities will reflect, will clearly have a period of consultation with their citizens on the island of Bougainville, and then begin to formulate an approach that will see a degree of independence or whatever might accrue. We don't want to presuppose anything at this stage as to what they may do, and then what then the relationship will be then to Papua New Guinea. So it remains quite a fluid situation, but again, just to pay tribute and credit to both sides here, they see this very much as a political dispute. It's one that's going to be resolved through dialogue and through negotiations and discussions, and reaching the kind of compromises and conclusions at a political level. It was an island, as I say, afflicted by conflict, very, very small place with a huge number of people who lost their lives, deep, deep scars, deep levels of trauma on the community. and I know myself, and certainly Bertie Ahern when he was there, were particularly moved and hopeful that at the end of all of this suffering that they've endured, that they would find the, as it were, the terms and the ability to reach new arrangements with the Papua New Guinean government. And I think there's a confidence and a hope and a will there that they will. What lessons one could draw, again, patience and dialogue. That Melanesian culture, I should say, it's a wonderful culture. It's probably a bit like Ireland. We took our time, and we acknowledged and recognized that a conflict that was as long as Ireland, or even a conflict in terms of Bougainville, was going to take a long time to resolve. So patience and a commitment and a tenacity to stick with the process, despite things going wrong, despite things moving backwards at times, was to stick with it and keep with it. And there were certainly similarities, I suppose, some similarities that I had drawn from my experience there over the course of the last 2 or 3 years.
Pat, I was also wondering if you can talk about how did they end up on the referendum? I think it's very interesting for a lot of Southern Cameroonians, Anglophones, who are interested in independence. I was actually at the UN when this was recognized. I saw we got statements from the UNGA regarding Bougainville's referendum. It was quite celebrated. I actually reached out to my own contacts who have been involved, and I got into a lengthy conversation, and they said this was exactly what you're saying. It's been a historical moment for them. So how do Southern Cameroonians get to that point, and is there a path to get to a point for referendum, and how did they get to that point? Can you expand on that?
Well, interestingly, one of the similarities in the Irish peace process and Bougainville was this importance that was placed on a popular mandate endorsing what the politicians had agreed. So, in many peace processes, it is probably arguable that people of a particular standing go into rooms and agreements are made, and that's the agreement. What was important in the Irish context was, and I think the Bougainvillean authorities recognized this, it's important to get the will of the people to put a stamp of approval on that. And so that while the process was negotiated at an upper political level, it received the popular endorsement of the people whose lives it would actually affect. The referendum process was very comprehensive. We spent months, almost a year, I think, in terms of just getting electoral registers completed, get the maximum amount of participation, and so on. So it was seen as a very, very important participative mechanism in endorsing what the peace agreement had done. Now, I come back to the point. In that particular context, there remains a number of challenges in front of the two administrations, both in Bougainville and in Papua New Guinea, to reach some final decisions on particularly the nature of the relationship between the two. And we will have to see how that plays out. So while the referendum was extremely important in giving a key signal to the negotiators and a key indication of where the people of Bougainville wanted things to go, it is now for, as I say, the two authorities, the Bougainvillean, the new president of Bougainville, and also then the Prime Minister then in Port Moresby, to, as it were, complete the discussions as to how and what and in what way effect will be given to the referendum in terms of the decision last year. So we've a little distance to go on that.
I'm going to thank you so much. I would love for we're going to jump into the international arena now, in a sense, and I mentioned the fact, and Judith, of course, also spoke about Ireland's membership on the Security Council. I was wondering, being Irish, what do you expect, or what do you see your government can do to address the crisis on the Security Council? And then we can talk about UK's presidency. But I think, being Irish, I think we should start there, and maybe you can speak on that. And then I can jump in, of course, in terms of talking about how, how Ireland may be able to address it.
Do you want Colm to take that, or?
I'm opening it up to both of you gentlemen. It's I'm completely
You go
up to
ahead there, Colm.
Colin, you need to unmute your microphone, please. Thank you.
Yeah, and we're just a small charity. What has struck me in my last few years, and admittedly I haven't been able to go over there for the last 3 years, is that at the beginning of this conflict, there was no real sense of a need for independence for the English-speaking area. There were concerns, but it was a federal system, and it always struck me as, well, there may be differences between the Anglophone area and the Francophone. When it came to something like football, they were all united. It was all Cameroon. And we know how well Cameroon did in things like the World Cup. But unfortunately, as the violence increased and with retaliation on both sides, it began to escalate. And the worse it got, the more people were asking and looking for independence. And I'm afraid that's the situation that we've got to at the moment, where there is that desire, which wasn't there before. And I think it's primarily come from the violence that's been perpetrated initially on the army side, but also came from the rebels. Excuse me. So that's all I can say.
So, on the more general point, in relation to Ireland's role on the Security Council, I think we will continue to adopt the position that we always have. I mean, we have a long association and a role. I mean, our ambassador, Geraldine Bourne-Nason, and the officials in New York. Geraldine is an extraordinarily accomplished diplomat, and she is, as we're well acquainted with the process of building peace, certainly in Ireland. She has served right across roles in the European Union and so on. So I think in terms of our the broad thrust of our policy will be certainly drawing on the lessons that we and the experiences that we have had at building a peace process in our own country, but also the experience of sending our peacekeepers, the United Nations peacekeepers all around the world that we would have sent out of our defence forces here in Ireland. The aid agencies that go all over the world that come from Ireland and work in developing parts of the world. I think we'll continue to support those efforts. I think that where it's possible for Ireland to raise its voice, and particularly for people who are suffering as a consequence of conflict, and as Colm has rightly said, violence has a very corrosive effect on human relations. And where you get violence, you get a very, very severe deepening of estrangement between communities. It's a sharp descent into a tribalization of attitudes and the dehumanizing of the other in community terms. And so I think what we have tried to do, and in our general approach around the world, and I think specifically particularly I'm thinking of the role inside the European Union that we would play, but we now have a role inside the Security Council. I think that we are always mindful of the corrosive effect that conflict has and the long-term damage it leaves on communities. I speak of this trauma. 3,800 people died in the conflict in Northern Ireland. 4,000 people have died by trauma-related suicide in the 20 years since the signing of the Good Friday Agreement. So deep has the trauma gone into society. So I think from Ireland's perspective, or from our perspective, I'm sure that there will be a willingness and a desire to be helpful and to play whatever role we can, and in particular to acknowledge the pain and the suffering of people in these regions.
You're on mute, Ifat.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate what you just said, and I do believe Ireland does have a role to play in the Security Council to address the crisis. They are in a unique position to address the crisis, and it's because even though there are, every conflict is different, I do think there are some similarities between the conflict we see in Cameroon and what Ireland has gone through. And one of the big things that we've seen over and over with this conflict is the issue of colonialism. And for me, I think if Ireland keeps bringing up the issue, it will put pressure on the government at the Security Council and on the government of Cameroon to come to the table. Ideally, for a lot of us, I think that if Ireland could add Cameroon, or push the other Security Council members to add Cameroon on the Security Council's agenda as a standalone, would be great. So there's another role for Ireland to play. But bringing up Ireland in various platforms on the Security Council could work, because it will over and over highlight the issues that we're seeing, such as, aid issue. And that is something, we are seeing statements coming from the UN regarding, are we hitting famine at this point or not? And the other issues, of course, like unbelievable amount of human rights violations that have gone without being any resolution or independence from the government. And what I mean by that, and those things, they need to be addressed on the Security Council. And I do think that's where Ireland can come in and mention these facts. And these are, that this conflict has been going on for so long, yet we see daily reports of killings happening, and then massacres happening one after another, to the point we don't even know an exact number of people who have died, because we don't have access to the region. There's not independent access by the UN. No assessment has been done. The numbers that the government may put out are not even, we may not even know, because I don't even know if the government has done, and I'm not even sure some of us who are independent are not from the country or the region would be even allowed to visit the areas. So I think Ireland has very interesting role to play on the Security Council, to just addressing the crisis itself on various platforms, like, in terms of violations on women's rights. And the conflict has overwhelmingly impacted women and children. And this is something Ireland can, I guess, in a sense, relate to, how the conflict, and the trauma that this conflict has put Southern Cameroonians through. So I now let's talk. This is in a sense perfect because I would love to hear what you have to say or the role UK play in terms of addressing the crisis. And yes, this is so appropriate for me because this time I want to hear what the Irish folks are thinking, what the UK do to address the crisis on the Security Council. It's perfect. It's for me. It's glorious in a sense. Now the Irish can't tell the UK, they should do this or not. But that's just me personally. I would love to hear your thoughts on that because the UK is having their presidency next month.
Like we have to be obviously careful not to, as it were, be making demands of anybody in any particular way. Look, I should say to you and to the assembled people on the webinar, the United Kingdom, in terms of dealing with the Northern Ireland problem and the governments dating back, to certainly John Major and even a little bit before, were excellent in as partners in resolving the Irish conflict in question. Bertie Ahern and Tony Blair worked extremely well together, hand in glove, in their strategic approach to resolving the problems, and tactically together as things went wrong and they had to manage things occurring as the process unfolded. So from our point of view, it's important to say here publicly and acknowledge the enormous role that the United Kingdom played in as partners in resolving that Irish conflict within Northern Ireland, and forging and forming new and unique and important relationships with us. And we have to acknowledge that and pay tribute. As I say, John Major and even Mrs. Thatcher towards the end of her tenure began to recognise the need for an appropriate process. Tony Blair and Gordon Brown and David Cameron, all in their own way playing particularly important roles. I think you're quite fortunate that the United Kingdom will have the chair, because they do know, as a sovereign government, the importance of listening out for signals and the importance of identifying opportunities within signals like language and developments, and hearing within organizations what the true intent is. And I think it would be important to speak to and be in touch with the British within the United Nations system, because they will be more acutely aware than many others about, as I said, the importance of identifying leaders, particularly within armed groups and so on, who may be willing to get into negotiated processes and so on, and identify opportunities to end the violence. It's most important. The violence ends. Stop the corrosive impact of the violence. Get people into rooms and talking around the relationships that need to be developed and sustained, and what structures are required then to underpin that. So, as I wouldn't necessarily be dictating to our British colleagues, I think they're well capable of identifying themselves as a sovereign government who were faced with similar challenges themselves about how and in what way they speak to armed groups who oppose them. They, as I say, will be acutely aware of the challenges and importance of doing that. But I say to you also, it's important that you remind them of the role they played, and remind them of the need to be, as it were, listening for those opportunities, and mindful and watching that they may occur as this particular conflict plays out. And look, I mean, obviously the efforts need to be underway, and the pressure needs to be kept on for both parties to cease, as it were, cease creating the environment for the conflict to continue, and to create an environment where people will get into rooms and get into mediated spaces and identify, as I say, opportunities to build trust. The key here is to build the trust, and then slowly, as I say, start the journey to the to a point where the violence is not something that's naturally going to occur in the immediate. That's a long process, but I'm afraid I don't have any shortcuts to indicate to you.
But I would just add that we mustn't forget that within the British government itself, we have got a number of people who are very concerned about the situation in the Anglophone area, and representations have been made. There have been speeches in the House of Lords. We have got many friends in the House of Lords and in the House of Commons itself. And there's no doubt in my mind that the pressure that, for instance, Bishop Philip was able to put on through getting our local MPs to make representations has had an effect on the British government. One of the big problems we've got, as far as the British government is concerned, is that, well, like many governments, they have lots of problems. And unfortunately, the problem in the Anglophone area of Cameroon is one of the most underreported scandals that has ever happened. And that is my big concern. We need to find some mechanism whereby what's been happening is brought to the public notice. And it's only by getting people, good war correspondents, people like that, into the country and reporting back that we will get governments to make much more of an effort. Otherwise, the problem just goes away and they have another problem to face somewhere else.
Thank you so much. Actually, that was, I was wondering, Colin, if you can go more into it in terms of how we could, or your organization can, and coming from a religious background with enormous knowledge and of the armed conflict and human rights abuses, how can you and us, rest of us, I guess, in a sense, engage with the British government to push for push the British government to talk about in addressing mediation and negotiation on the Security Council. And this is an excellent question, and I say this because in the last Security Council under UNOCA, we saw that the British government, in a sense, endorsed the National Grand Dialogue that many of us were not pro this, and I thought it was a bit interesting how the British government took that position, which if the British government had done a bit of, I guess, research or done reach out, that they would have noticed a lot of Southern Cameroonians were just not interested. I would say majority of Southern Cameroonians, or 100%, were not interested in participating. So what can you or your organization do to correct those kinds of things and actually talk about having an inclusive dialogue to ask the government to come to the table?
Well, I'm afraid, as I said at the very beginning, we are just a small charity. We are part of the Portsmouth Diocese. Our own bishop has made representations to the government, has been lobbying all our MPs, and has also taken the matter to the Bishops' Conference. And it may well be that that could be extended by making it more ecumenical and involving other religions. I know for a fact that in the Anglophone area, all of the Christian churches have got together and have condemned the violence and urged all parties to come together. But there's only so far we can go. The British government for many years has taken the view that really the problem is a Cameroonian one, and very much and Cameroon is very much part of the French diaspora as well. And I think the France is the elephant in the room. France dominates what happens in Cameroon. And I'm afraid the British government has tended to look at it in that way as well in the past. Because if you look at the total of Cameroon, the Anglophone area is very small in comparison to the rest of the country. And most of the activities, services, and so on are very much French dominated, as is the whole education system in the rest of Cameroon. So if things are to move, I think the British government and the Irish government might try and bring France into the discussions as well.
Thank you so much. It's very interesting. I do think this is something else that, Pat, you may agree with. I think the fact that Ireland is part of the European Union, and it does give Ireland some leverage in terms of engaging with various countries to pressure France and to ask the government to come to the table. And that means also addressing the crisis at the Human Rights Council. I believe Ireland and the UK are members of the Human Rights Council. That leads us to a different question that away from the Security Council, but on the Human Rights Council, in terms of, do you think we could ask Irish government and the British government to join and to see if we could do a fact-finding mission for the Anglophone regions?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, it would do no harm. I mean, you know, to this is where I get a couple of countries, maybe not just Ireland and the UK, get a couple of countries that would be interested in discovering the exact nature of the impact of the conflict down here in Cameroon, and then to see what reasonably could be affected by way of a process, but also as has already been said, I mean, I think it probably is important to engage with the French from the perspective of their assistance as people of influence, perhaps, because, as I said at the outset, our process in Ireland was quite comprehensive, and we included people, of course, from our American diaspora in the course of the Irish peace process. And if there was an opportunity and the French were willing, as I say, to play a positive role, you could see the advantage of having them as part of the effort and the discussion to bring a close to what is clearly a tragedy for many people down there.
Right.
Colin, do you want to add anything else to this?
No, not really.
You're on mute. You're on mute, Ifat.
I'm sorry. I'm old, so technology is not my thing. I keep on muting and muting myself. Can we talk about possible paths of mediation and negotiation? And if Ireland, I mean, for me, Ireland and the UK can play a role, since you know, Southern Cameroon, it's a former colony. What role do you think in terms of they can play in mediation and negotiation process?
I mean, the first order of business, I mean, is a correct analysis, and that would mean an awful lot of listening and understanding as to the experiences of those who are being afflicted by the conflict, and then following that as best could be achieved, perhaps, as I've said previously, with the assistance of countries like France and so on, to encourage and to be positive in the role that might be played to reach some kind of a comprehensive approach. I think it's important to accept, look, as many positive forces supporting an initiative is clearly important. You don't want people opting out or half engaged or whatever. As much positive movement as you can assemble is important here. But I mean, fundamentally, Ireland, I think, and organisations like ours in Glencree, our whole ethos here in this small place on the island of Ireland has been devoted to and dedicated to mediated dialogue. It is the ability to get people into the room who up to that point would not converse and would not engage, and through a process of long sustained engagement, humanize the relationships. This is the critical thing. If you can humanize relationships and get people to see others in a human sense, the transformative effect is incalculable, and really you can move very far. I'm not saying you can move very fast, but you can move very far. It does take time, but it is all about humanizing relationships and building that trust and durability in a process. A lot of peace processes around the world, they're like tick boxes, check boxes. They run vertically, 1 to 10. In Ireland, we did it slightly different. We took those vertical set of check boxes, where some people believe you just tick the 10 boxes and you're there. We turned them horizontally, and each of the check boxes represent a phase, and we build permanence and durability in the process and the relationships. And that means when something goes wrong, as it inevitably will, you don't go back to stage one. You may step back 1 or 2 steps because you've permanence and durability in the process. And so that's what really you got to aspire to, creating something like that, I think, in this particularly complicated arena where you have, as it were, old world powers who could be very positive and play a very constructive role. And then you have actors in the region around this country who could also be positive. And it's about harnessing as much positivity as you can, and creating almost an irresistible dynamic towards a negotiated set of arrangements that offer protection to the two different identities. It's not that you want to make circumstances where everybody will be the same. You need to create institutions and structures that reflect the identities of the two communities that are different, but have structures that are agreed, that protect those entities and identities.
Thank you again, Pat, for your knowledge and your experience. There's something else that I and various other organizations are pushing behind the scene, and recently we saw that European Union also adopted the GLOMEG Sanctions Act, which for many of us believe should be an instrument in terms of addressing the crisis. And this is, I say this, and forgive me if I'm if I'm wrong, but the trouble with Cameroon that we're seeing is that the government will not come to the table. What are your thoughts on using such instruments? And this is also can apply in the UK context and the European Union context, where, of course, Ireland is a member of. I would love to hear your thoughts on those.
I mean, I think the first effort needs to be trying to engage with the Cameroon government to acknowledge that there is clearly a serious problem and a conflict which needs to be addressed. I think the problem with any peace process is if one or other party get out of the bed in the morning thinking that the status quo is okay, then it's very difficult in any circumstances, regardless of what you do, to move them. And that generally is, related to the problems directly in front of them. The status quo is not something that challenges them, then it's unlikely that much else will. I wouldn't like to speculate on what the European Union or other countries might do in relation to trade. Clearly, the United Kingdom is in a different set of circumstances now. Trade is not and sanctions are not the competence of individual states of the European Union, and it's their competences within the Union overall. So, I mean, my first sense of would be is to bring there are many ways to bring diplomatic pressure, and sometimes the illusion of positive diplomatic pressure can focus minds and governments in peculiar ways, and so I think that's what you need to kind of focus on first, and see, as I said earlier, is there a way of creating an array of pressure, and encouragement, not just pressure, but encouragement also, for people to move in the right direction. As I said, this is a conflict proper in this region, in this country. It behoves governments and everybody to, as it were, do all that's possible to bring it to an end and to, as I say, reach new structures. I'm not going to, for a moment, suggest that that's easy, and as I say, that does take a lot of courage and so on by both parts who've been involved in it. But ultimately, as we found in our own circumstances here in Ireland, it all came down to sitting around the table after all of the bombings and all of the shootings and all of the various atrocities that were committed. It all came down to that 10th of April day, 1998, when a piece of paper was signed. And the sooner that can be done, and the less lives lost on the journey to that moment, then the less there is to deal with in terms of the trauma that then remains afterwards.
That's the great concern that
Thank you so much.
this conflict has only really been going very strongly for the last 4 years. How many more years will it have to go before people get together? That is my big concern. I do have some hope, though, and possibly through the presidency of the UK in the Security Council, with the support of countries like Ireland and the USA and Canada. And there are a number of other countries like Switzerland who have also been involved in trying to put pressure on the Cameroonian government to get involved. Maybe through having the presidency and being able to highlight it, it can bring it to the attention of other countries to get more support, to try and persuade what is an intransigent government to sit down and to talk and to allow other neutral people to come in and to try and get involved in moderating any discussion. And I'm hopeful that something like this will emerge in the next year or so. My other big concern is that something like that will only happen when there's yet another huge atrocity. And that's the only thing that gets a few headlines into the papers and people say, oh dear, and then you get your people going out and doing some news flashes and coming back in. Hopefully that is not the way we can bring people together to the table is through talking, and maybe through organizations, particularly like the United Nations, which should be able to get in there and have a neutral stance.
This is a very important point that Colin makes, that can't allow the process of reaching an agreement to be hostage to the last atrocity. So it's very important that, you know, a degree of effort and real energy is put behind a process to make sure that it doesn't become, as I say, and as Colin has alluded to there, it doesn't become the hostage to the last or the next atrocity.
You're mute again.
I'm sorry. This is the lovely thing about being on Zoom. Forget to mute and unmute. At this point, I want to thank the panelists for joining us. But before you go, we would love to hear your closing remarks. And Colin, I would love for you to go first and actually speak about in terms of working with the armed separatists, not armed separatists, sorry, I mean like in terms of arms conflict, and if you can, how do you go about doing that? If you can include that aspect in your closing remark, I'd be grateful. And afterward, we would love to open it up to Pat.
Okay, well, for ourselves, we will continue to pressurize the British government through our local MPs and through the Bishops' Conference to highlight the problems that are happening and to try and persuade the British government to get more directly involved in the situation. As a charity, there's not much more that we ourselves can do. Personally, I speak on the radio, I've been on local TV, I give talks, we have our website, we can do something on those lines, but we are just a small cog in what, you know, really is a big pool. I would hope that both sides would make some efforts to come together. On the dissident side, we have had something called Ghost Mondays, whereby every Monday everything closes down, nobody moves. And this is something that's come from the dissident side. My own personal feeling is that this does not help the people, in that they are already suffering from the violence and everything else. But that is one possible big step that they could take forward to show that they are prepared to sit down and discuss by removing the ghost days. The government, on the other hand, should be prepared to allow organizations like the UN to come in and to prepare comprehensive reports on the actual situation there, what's happening, and where the atrocities can be, the atrocities can be attributed to. I haven't got much more to say to that. As I say, we are just a charity. I'm no expert on people's conflict, other than from my own personal experiences and my experiences of living in Africa and having been in Africa many, many times. Thank you for very much for giving me the opportunity to speak. I'm not sure how much I've been able to contribute, but all I can do is wish you all the best for the future. And certainly the problems of Cameroon will always be very, very high in my mind. And I can't wait to get back out there myself and to try and get involved in the work that we've been doing in the past. Thank you very much.
Pat, would love to hear also your closing remark. regarding Cameroon and your recommendations in terms of how to move forward with the conflict.
Well, again, as I started, I wouldn't be prescribing any particular course of action at this stage. I mean, other than the sooner the better that people can get into a process of identifying the causes of the conflict, reaching conclusions about how they should be addressed, and humanizing relationships. I think that's clearly what's urgent here. I think insofar as we can my organization here in Glencree and in County Wicklow, in Ireland, we can certainly bring these points that we've heard this evening to the attention of our foreign ministry, and we can talk to our friends in New York, Ambassador Bornason and so on, who is of course an excellent representative for the country. I'll also speak, I know the nuncio, our own nuncio, well, we call him our papal nuncio. He's the Vatican's papal nuncio to Ireland, and he's a man I'm acquainted with. He's a fine fellow, and he's done some work with us in our own organisation here in Dublin. So I'll have a chat with him in due course as well. And look, we will raise the issues that have been raised this evening, and again to wish everybody the very best in the efforts to Judith and Henry. I was very, very taken and struck by their commitment to this challenge in these circumstances, being so far away, yet their hearts are clearly back home. And I want to acknowledge that and to say, it's a great thing to have such a civic sense and a duty to your community and to your country back home. And I salute you and commend you, and please do keep up the work of raising these issues. It's of vital importance anywhere in the world where we see injustice or suffering or violence. Of course, it should be highlighted, and clearly you're doing a fantastic and exemplary job in highlighting all of these issues. So my very best to your continued efforts and success, and look, thank you so much for allowing me to participate in this evening. It's been very interesting.
Thank you so much. Sorry, I can hear. I think someone's mic is on, and I can hear my own voice returning back. I really want to thank you for what you had to say, and I think it's very important for us to hear what you have to say. It's on an international level and also on a national level, and the work you've done on the international scene. I think there are always lessons we can learn. There are methods. There in terms of how to connect with people, and what you said, at the end of the day, we have to come to the table. And I really I feel honored to be able to moderate this panel, because the immense respect I have for your work. In terms of, I'm so sorry that I couldn't answer all the questions, but Judith has done an excellent job in terms of picking up some really great questions. And for us, because we have such a short timing, that we would love for us to address the crisis on an international level. And given the fact Ireland is on the Security Council, it really mattered to hear your voice on this issue. And I have to say to our attendees that we may not all agree on the issues, but I want to say that we all come from former colonies, so there is a connection for all of us, and we may not have the same experience, but we can always connect and relate to each other to address each other's suffering. And I think in terms of my background, my own country, coming from Bangladesh, I separated from Pakistan, and there's a reason why. It's because there was a genocide happening, and it was due to language for us, actually. really. So this is very close to my heart, the issue. So this is where I'm coming from. Since we ran out of time, I thank you so much for also inviting me to moderate the panel. And I'm so sorry that I couldn't answer all the questions. I think I've tried as much as I could, and Judith, of course, also picked out really interesting questions. So thank you, everybody. Thank you. And Pat, please do reach out to the New York mission. I think any help we can get to push the Irish mission to address the crisis on the Security Council would be great. Any attention on the crisis, positive attention in terms of, because I do believe it does create pressure on the government to come to the table for us. That's very important. And that we have been working on this for years now, in a sense, unfortunately for us, some of us. So it's been really, I don't want to say struggle, but we had our moments in terms of trying to get the government on the negotiating table. And we are following various negotiations that have been taking place. And we will, on our side, do, in terms of with my organization, well, the organization I represent, we are going to do whatever we can. Of course, you have to understand, we don't have the resources all the time. So a lot of time we're just running around, but that, may not be always, I may not be always capable of doing a lot of the work on my own. So I'm really looking forward to more partnership. And I think if we can all come together, it'd be great. And I say this because we may not agree on various issues, but we can come together on a common ground and address issue. And I think that's where the strength will lie at the end of the day. And since we have, Pat, you're in the in Ireland, and Colin, like, you're also there, and I think, like, we have people who are on our side in terms of addressing the crisis. So I want to thank everybody for participating. Sorry if I'm speaking too much. I want to thank Judith and Henry for inviting me, and I want to thank the panelists. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here, and I'm so sorry about my schedule. But thank you. I cannot express enough how thankful I am. What you said also, Pat, and what you said, Colin, in terms of engagement, it's may not be big organizations, but every little thing that you do counts for something. And the more pressure we put on these governments, on the European Union, whether the UK, Irish government, and the Security Council, for me, everything helps. So thank you so much. Anything, Judith, you might want to add? Thank you.
Thanks, Ifat, and thanks again to everybody. That was an excellent discussion. Thanks, Pat. Thanks, Colm, for really, really accepting our invitations and turning up with such good ideas and such hope for us. We want to thank everybody who joined the call. Thanks for submitting your questions. And like Ifat said, we understand not all the questions have been answered during this discussion, but the coalition is planning a bigger forum with UK PMs, MPs, with UK MPs and foreign policy experts, which will be coming up soon. And a lot of those really pertinent questions will be answered. I really want to cite a few people: Dennis, Callistus, Yamagi, Roberta. We have been seeing all your questions, and if they have not been answered, just know that we are planning other webinars and forums with MPs and foreign policy experts who will answer them. And hopefully, even if we don't get all those questions answered, we are taking them down and we'll forward them to the parties that be. Colm, we just want to thank you so much for all the humanitarian work being done in times of crisis and conflict. It's not just the guns, but people also suffer. And we really, really want to appreciate the work you, your organization, the church, have been doing to help those affected by the crisis. We are counting on you. As Ifat said, no organization is too small. We are counting on you to work with the church. The CDN is also working through our advisory board to getting to work with the Vatican and the church as well. So hopefully we'll partner on that. We already have some channels opened and doing some negotiations. So we, sorry, not negotiations, doing some advocacy. So hopefully we'll partner on that and see how much we can count on the church and the Vatican to help us. We really look forward to working with you and your organization in a more substantive manner in the nearest future on this policy issues so that we can achieve CDN's goal to make sure that we can get a UN mandated mediation and negotiation process to be able to end this genocide that's going on. So once more, thank you so much. Thanks to everybody. Thanks as always to Kevin and team in the background, making things run smoothly. And just to let everybody know, CDN is actually planning a lot of webinars lined up in the next few weeks to do with the Security Council, the recent US resolution, other advocacy people we've managed to get in touch with who will come on board to be able to tell us how we can put pressure for this mediation and negotiation to take place. I want to thank my team at the back, the rest of the coalition, the steering committee, co-chair Dennis, the steering committee, as well as members of the coalition for helping in the background. I know I normally come and talk, but there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes for all of this to happen. So thank you, and we hope to see you in a few weeks. Please just keep an eye out for announcements for the next webinars. And don't forget to fill in the survey we sent. We are working on the resolutions which we came up with, and one of those was an elder statesman forum, a statespersons forum, as well as the leadership forum. So we've sent out the survey. Please don't forget to fill out that survey so you help us with the work we are doing. And with that, I'll say goodbye and Happy New Year. Hopefully the year starts on a good footing and we get to achieve loads this year, and the conflict, hopefully, we'll have a ceasefire at some point in the near future. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks.